roll and go. Where am I to go? Meet Johnny, where am I to go? For I'm a young and a sailor lad, and where am I to go?
Hello, and welcome to Where Am I to Go podcast. Today we are at a museum that has always been on my top 10 as far as museums go. I visited here twice, one time at their old location and now at their new location. We are in Albuquerque, New Mexico, and we are at the National Museum of Nuclear Science and History. And I'm here with Sam today. Wow, almost forgot his name. Anyway, we're here with Sam, and Sam's going to talk to us about this museum. And just as a heads up, I really like this museum. And the reason I do is because nuclear energy, nuclear weapons, nuclear everything is such a controversial subject. And this museum does a very nice job of presenting both sides and of giving an overview of nuclear history in such a way that it's easy to understand and very non-biased, I guess I would say.
They try to be non-biased. Some of us have a little bit of bias.
Well, but it's a controversial subject, so of course you're going to. But this may get controversial. Who knows? I don't really care.
Okay.
I want history, and I want to know how everything went. So welcome, Sam, to Where Am I to Go podcast.
Thank you.
Okay.
I wanted to give you a quick background so you know where I'm coming from.
Just go ahead. Let's do your background so you know where we're coming from.
Oh, okay.
I want it.
Oh, okay. So, I will give you a quick background. Graduated from the Air Force Academy in 1964.
Okay.
Went to pilot training, went into Strategic Air Command as a B-52 pilot. Have many hours on alert as a B-52 pilot with nuclear weapons, both co-pilot and pilot. Spent a year in Vietnam as a forward air controller. And then came back, checked out as an aircraft commander, and flew Arc-Light in B-52s in Vietnam. So I'm familiar with the alert during the Cold War era.
Okay.
And then I was assigned for a master's degree in chemistry, taught at the Air Force Academy for 4 years, went back to Bombers and Wing Staff for 4 years, and then went to the Air Power Research Institute as the original Strategic Research Associate, and then took command of the Defense Nuclear Agency detachment at Los Alamos National Laboratory for 2 years.
Okay.
And from there, I went 6 years to Lockheed Skunk Works, and then when the F-22 went to Marietta, Georgia, I went down there on a different program.
Okay, so you haven't been involved in nuclear your whole life at all, have you?
No.
Well, this is an honor to do a tour with somebody that's so knowledgeable and has such a wide range of knowledge. Now, when you were flying the B-52s, were you carrying nuclear weapons in those planes? Or
I flew one airborne alert armed. I was a brand new co-pilot. They needed somebody as an extra pilot to fill the right seat when the pilot was resting, so that was me.
Okay.
But after that, I went to Vietnam before our next rotation in the unit for airborne alert, and when I got back, they were no longer flying armed.
Okay.
So that was after the 68 incident at Thule.
Okay, what was the 68 incident at Thule?
Well, there was a mission at Thule. One of the airborne alert orbits was a figure 8 over Thule, Greenland at the ballistic missile early warning site.
Okay.
So we were radio relay in case they lost communication with the lower 48. Our aircraft had the capability of talking to them on UHF and then talking to all 3 numbered Air Force headquarters and SAC headquarters in the States via HF radio.
Okay.
So we were a radio relay if needed. We were one of the 5 orbits.
Okay. Okay.
Right here is where we start with what they call pathway to discovery.
Okay.
The splitting of the atom was not a sudden thing. It actually began back in the mid-1800s.
Really?
Yeah, with John Dalton is generally considered to be the individual that conceptualized the atom as we know it today.
Okay.
But in 600 BC, there was an Indian philosopher who came up with the idea. And in 460 BC, Democritus in Greece came up with the idea. So it's not new, but they had no science to back it. Dalton is where the science starts to back up the atom to describe it as we know it today.
Really?
Yeah.
I didn't have any idea that they were aware of the atom that long ago.
Well, it was a philosophical concept that there was a basic piece of matter.
Okay.
And so now Mendeleev takes that knowledge and creates the first periodic chart based on atomic weight. That's not the exactly correct way to do it, but it was good enough that they were actually able to predict where elements should be and then find them.
Okay. And as we come into the museum, you have the periodic table all laid out in tile on the floor.
Yeah.
That's kind of cool.
Yeah, that is actually very handy, especially when we're working with students.
Okay. Yeah, I'll bet it is.
Yeah. So various people contribute. You have Marie Curie working with radium. Albert Einstein, I don't even need to say anything about. Koch and Röntgen the X-ray. Thomson discovered the electron. Rutherford put together the concept of the nucleus of the atom with protons and neutrons, and then Niels Bohr put the electrons around them.
Okay.
So now you have the concept of the atom. Then in 1938, Otto Hahn and Fritz Strassmann were working in Germany, and in December of 38, they split the atom. And they didn't know what they'd done.
Okay.
They had a colleague, Elisa Mittner, who was Jewish, and when Hitler took over Austria in 1938, she had to flee to Sweden.
Okay.
So they sent the data to her, and she and her nephew, Otto Hahn, went on a long walk, and they figured out what had happened. And in fact, Otto Hahn named it fission after cell division.
Really? Okay.
So now, Otto Frisch and Niels Bohr are good friends. So he tells Niels Bohr about it. About halfway through the explanation, the light dawns on Niels Bohr. Niels Bohr then, in 1939, attends a physics conference in the U.S., and at that point, the world knew the atom had been split.
Okay, so the Germans are the ones that first split the atom.
Yeah.
And they were the forefront on the knowledge, or?
Yes and no.
Okay.
One of their big problems was that Hitler, in his anti-Jewish rants, had chased almost every nuclear scientist out of Germany, Hungary, and all the surrounding areas. And so actually in Germany, the one who really understood it that was left was Heisenberg.
Okay.
And Hitler didn't even want nuclear physics taught in the universities. Heisenberg defied him and taught it.
Really?
Yeah. So what you actually have is that all the German scientists that would have been integral in his program were working for the United States and Great Britain.
Okay.
So.
Wow. That's interesting.
Now, for some people have heard of the Einstein letter. And that is a letter signed by Albert Einstein that went to Roosevelt that started our nuclear program.
Okay.
Now, the Einstein letter was not written by Einstein. It was written by Leo Szilard, a Hungarian Jewish scientist.
Okay.
And he was very politically astute. And when he saw Germany trying to gather uranium and heavy water, he knew where they were going. So he wrote the letter, got Einstein to sign it, because Einstein was the only scientist with enough horsepower to get it to Roosevelt.
Right.
Roosevelt read it and reacted and established a committee to look at it under Lyman Briggs, the chief of the National Bureau of Standards. Now, during that time period, they held a meeting, the military, everybody involved, and they came up with 4 goals. Find a source of uranium, find a commercial method to purify it, see if it could be used for energy, see if it could be used for a weapon.
Okay.
And that's about as far as it went until about the middle of 1941, because Lyman Briggs was not the least bit interested.
Huh.
In 1940, Rudolf Perls and Otto Frisch had done a series of calculations and come up with a concept that you'd only need about 1 pound of enriched uranium to make a weapon. Before that, everybody was thinking of shiploads of uranium, maybe get it into a port and explode it.
Wow.
So that was a major breakthrough. And they sent their letter to the British and to America. Lehman Briggs dropped it in his file, forgot about it. The British jumped on it immediately and initiated their MOD project, making tube alloys, which was their code word for nuclear science.
Okay, so now was that part of the Lend-Lease program?
No, that was they were working on it on their own.
Okay.
U.S., Great Britain, Germany, and Japan were all running independent programs.
So Japan was running it too?
Yeah. Now, as it turns out, some people around here are more knowledgeable in this than I am, obviously, but several of us believe that Japan may have been a bit further along than Germany, because in Germany, Hitler considered it Jewish science.
Right.
He didn't want to play any part of it. It wasn't fast enough for him. And the army was jealous of the academics, so what little resource they had was split between two people, two groups.
Right.
So with that kind of split resource, there was no way.
Huh.
Japan was under-resourced, but at least it was under the direction of a single director.
Okay. So how much did we beat Japan by as far as
Oh,
the
significant.
development? Okay.
Significant. Neither Germany nor Japan ever put enough resources into it to get anywhere where they could get a viable weapon.
Okay.
And a little further on, we can discuss exactly what kind of resources we put into it. It's mind-boggling.
Okay. That'd be great. Then we come on into this this gallery here. We have a lot of World War II, I'm assuming.
Yes.
Weaponry, sword, helmet.
That's an aircraft radio.
An aircraft radio, okay.
And then here you have the German. And just note of interest, look at the Japanese rifle and the German rifle, and notice how small they are as compared to the M1 Garand, which was the standard World War II rifle.
Right, but the M1 Garand was semi-auto, and
These are all
ones are bolt.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. The M1 Garand is heavy.
Yes, it is a heavy. I've shot one before, and they are
Yeah,
heavy.
well, I lived with one for 3 years at the academy.
I didn't do that, but I'd sure like to have one now. They are a lot of fun.
This next display, and unfortunately your listeners can't see it, but it is a display involving a lot of original radio type equipment, scientific equipment that's all tubes and
Right.
everything.
Now they could do this with a cell phone. But
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah, well, no, they could do twice, 3 times as much with a cell phone. But at any rate, this is a science, an artist concept of the 4 different laboratories working on critical mass.
Okay.
And what's interesting about it is everything there is period correct. But on top of that, everything there came from Los Alamos. So in concept, that actually could have been in these labs.
Okay. And we're looking at a display that's probably 15 by 15 that has computers, or not computers, but tube-operated radio equipment and stuff that's standing 8 foot tall. We've got about 10 boxes that are 2 foot wide, 2 foot deep, and 8 foot tall, with wires coming out of them. We've got typewriters, we've got adding machines, we've got all kinds of things in this display. And what are the bricks around sitting on top of a table with a big bowl with a little cylinder in it?
Those are lead bricks to protect against neutron radioactivity.
Okay.
The cylinders are how they were trying to determine critical mass.
Okay.
So they would bring the 2 halves of the cylinder together and they would hear it pick up on the Geiger counter, and they'd move it apart, and they'd know when, they'd get readings out of it. Now, there were 2 accidents. One where they were bringing it together, and they had a screwdriver in there, and it slipped, and it came together, and it flashed. And the individual that was doing the experiment told everybody to freeze, drew circles around, had told them to draw circles around where they were. He knew he had a lethal dose. But everybody else, because they knew where each person was, they were able to tailor medical help for them, and he was the only one that died.
Really?
Yeah.
But he saved everybody else in the process.
Yes.
Wow.
The second accident occurred on something that was totally bizarre. The scientist was working on it, and he leaned over his experiment, and his body became a neutron reflector and reflected neutrons back in and caused it to flash.
Really? Wow. You wouldn't have thought your body would be able to do that.
No, it's surprising, but yeah, you'd be surprised what will reflect the neutron.
Well, and being new into the technology and stuff, you don't understand that
Yeah,
stuff
that's
until
exactly,
it happens.
That's exactly the point. That's why they were trying to figure critical mass. Now, I don't know if everybody understands critical mass.
Why don't you tell me? Because I don't know if I understand critical mass.
So there are three terms I'm going to be using with respect to critical mass that are important. Subcritical. That means that, yes, it's radioactive. It is not enough to sustain a chain reaction.
Okay.
Critical mass is enough radioactive material to sustain a chain reaction.
Okay.
Supercritical mass is an explosive mass.
Okay.
So when you're dealing with it, you're taking subcritical mass, putting it into a reactor, bringing it critical, and holding it at a certain level. That's a nuclear reactor.
Okay.
If you just let it go, it goes supercritical.
That's a bomb.
That's a bomb.
Okay. And now what you're using for this critical mass, I'm assuming mass refers to a weight of some sort or another. Is that the weight of the plutonium or?
Yeah, it kind of transfers to weight. But it's either plutonium or uranium-235 enriched.
Okay.
So that's the two primary sources of fission are U-235 enriched. Reactors take 5 to 10% enrichment. Weapons take an incredible amount of enrichment.
Okay, and what are they enriching it with?
Well, we'll get to that.
Okay. Because I know that they mine uranium and plutonium both right out of the ground.
They do not mine plutonium. Plutonium is man-made.
Oh, okay. Well, I know that they do uranium.
Yeah, as a matter of fact, uranium, atomic number 92, is the last naturally occurring element in the periodic chart.
Okay.
Periodic chart now goes to 118.
Okay.
Everything above that's man-made.
Okay.
Plutonium is a byproduct of a nuclear reactor.
Okay.
They call them breeder reactors.
Okay.
So, where do we go from here? Well, once the United States got off its butt and they formed Van Everbush took over the committee from Lehman Briggs. And he realized things that needed to move on. So he said the weaponry needs to go to the military. So the military formed an engineering district through the Corps of Engineers to deal with it. And in true Corps of Engineer tradition, the group was formed in Manhattan, ergo it was the Manhattan Engineering District.
Okay.
So that's where the Manhattan Project came from.
Okay.
So at that point, it was under the command of Colonel George Marshall. And Lehman Briggs felt it was not moving fast enough, so he pulled him out and put Leslie Groves in. Groves had brought the Pentagon in on time, on budget, and Groves really didn't want it. He wanted to go overseas because he wanted to be a general, and they told him he would make general if he took it. He took it September 12th, September 23rd, he was promoted to general.
Wow.
So that's where that went. Now in 41 to 42, they were still doing basic science.
Okay.
Around it. In 42, Enrico Fermi was charged with seeing if he could make a sustained chain reaction. And what he was working at the University of Chicago, and the University of Chicago football stadium had been abandoned for about 5 years, and there was a soccer court, or a squash court, under the stadium. And so that's where he was working. And he built what's called Chicago Pile 1.
Okay.
And on December, I believe it's 2nd or 3rd, of December 2nd, 1942, he said, we're going to break for lunch and we're going to start it after lunch. They broke for lunch, they came back, they started it, and he was exactly right. They had a sustained chain reaction.
Okay, and what exactly does that mean?
Well, that means a number of things. Number one, that's your first nuclear reactor.
Okay.
So
they were getting energy from that.
They were getting energy. They were not using it yet, but yes, they were getting energy from it in the form of heat.
Okay.
And number two, it proved beyond a shadow of doubt that a nuclear weapon was feasible.
Okay. Wow.
So he was using uranium and blocks of graphite. And the reason for that is when you split the atom, a neutron will split an atom of high atomic weight.
Okay.
And Niels Bohr figured out that if you had an even number of protons and an odd number of neutrons, that gave you your best possibility of splitting.
Okay.
Ergo, uranium-235, plutonium-239.
Okay.
So it's 92, 235, 94, 239.
Okay.
So when you split the atom, you get two what they call daughter products or two fission products. It's two smaller atoms, basically.
Okay.
But in addition, you get anywhere from 2 to 3 neutrons.
Okay.
So the problem is those neutrons coming out are extremely energetic. They are coming out at 200 million electron volts.
Okay.
That's a lot of power.
That's a lot of power.
But you really want this neutron running about 2 million electron volts so that it'll interact with the nucleus.
Okay.
That's where the moderator comes in. So graphite or heavy water slows the neutron down without absorbing it.
Okay.
So you've slowed it down to the speed you want, and then it can interact with other atoms. And so Chicago Pile 1 was a mix of uranium and graphite bricks.
Okay, and so they sent the atom through the graphite bricks and it slowed it down before it hit the atom.
Well, it was started with a neutron generator.
Okay.
And then as the neutrons came off, they were slowed down so they'd interact with the rest of it.
Okay. Dang. And you've got some pictures here of these neutron blocks, graphite blocks.
Well, we actually have one of his blocks.
Oh, do you?
This is
Wow.
This is a Lego model of Chicago Pile 1. The gray kind of represents uranium, that is actually one of his graphite blocks, and you can see its number in the position.
Okay. And how long do these hold up to this activity?
Forever, basically.
Forever. Okay.
They just slow it down. They don't interact. They just slow it down.
Okay. And this is kind of a Lego model of a reactor?
Of what's called Chicago Pile 1.
Okay. And it's built out of Legos, but it shows very well how things are set up. And then you've got your graphite block. And the graphite block is what, probably 4 inches by 4 inches and 14, 15 inches long?
Something like that. Maybe more.
And that's solid graphite?
Solid graphite.
Solid graphite. Wow. Okay.
So, in 1942, December, we know beyond a shadow of a doubt that an atomic bomb is possible.
Okay.
So now we move full speed into the Manhattan Project.
Okay.
And Los Alamos was chosen for a number of reasons. They needed a place that was relatively isolated, but not so far away from logistics that they couldn't get what they needed.
Okay.
They were looking for an isolated area. Turns out Robert Oppenheimer's family has a ranch in Chico Canyon.
Okay.
They are aware of the Los Alamos Ranch School, which in 1942 was told they were going out of business because Los Alamos was taking it over.
Okay. And Los Alamos is kind of north central, kind of western central New Mexico,
yeah,
right?
it's a little west of, if you go the road Albuquerque, Santa Fe, it's to the west, up in the Jimenez Mountains.
And it's beautiful country around
Oh, it is. It's gorgeous country. Now, some fun facts about Los Alamos. The school had 6 primary houses for professors and stuff. And that picked up the nickname Bathtub Row, because those were the only houses that had bathtubs. They were for the chief scientists.
Okay.
And they had figured they'd need about 600 people there. When they hit 6,000, they figured they'd made a mistake.
Oh, yeah.
So
Wow.
at any rate, from 1943, you had the Los Alamos Ranch School, which basically had the lodge and a few houses, and you went to a city of about 6,000.
Unbelievable.
And what's interesting is you had a lot of young scientists who were newly married and stuff, and you had not that much to do. You know, they built their own ski area, they could hike, they could horseback ride, and General Groves had a heck of a time trying to figure out why he had to keep adding on to the maternity ward.
I wonder why.
I wonder why. Yeah, we had a baby boom.
I'll bet you did. It turned from 6,000 to 7 and 8 pretty quick, huh?
And what's even more interesting is one Sunday morning in here, I had a woman who said she was number 53 baby at Los Alamos.
Wow.
As it turns out, Los Alamos itself is the smallest part of the Manhattan Project.
Okay.
It's obviously the scientific head. It's where everything came together. But there were two other major facilities that far outstripped Los Alamos.
Was White Sands one of them?
No.
Okay.
We're talking about Oak Ridge. And unfortunately, it's kind of covered up here, but maybe we can sneak back. No. Okay. Oak Ridge, Tennessee was tasked with two things. Number one, they were tasked to try to enrich uranium.
Okay.
And then number two, they were tasked to build a reactor and see if they could produce plutonium.
Okay.
They succeeded in building the reactor and producing plutonium. So that spun off the other site. But at Oak Ridge, they continued to work with enriching uranium. And now what that means is natural uranium is 0.7% of your U-235 is 0.7% of natural uranium.
Okay.
So with U-235, you've got to get it to a very, very high concentration to make a bomb.
Okay.
90% plus. So what they did was they tried three methods. The first one was thermal diffusion. And that sort of worked. And in fact, it kind of made feeder streams for the others. They tried gaseous diffusion. And while that didn't work during the war, they perfected it during the war, and it became the way of enriching uranium after the war.
Okay.
During the war, they used what was called a calutron, and it's a derivative of the cyclotron. So what they would do is they would take a uranium hexafluoride gas, ionize it, and accelerate it down a tunnel. At the end of the tunnel was an incredibly powerful electromagnet
Okay.
that would cause the stream to bend.
Okay.
And because you have a little wee tiny 3 atomic mass unit difference in weight, the U-238 will turn at a different rate than the U-235. So they would turn it, and then they would bleed off the U-235 where it would hit in the turn. It was a 180-degree turn. So then you would think, oh, they've got it. No, it would take tens of thousands of iterations on the same gas stream to get the uranium.
This sounds complicated.
It was. And a lot of Oak Ridge was manned by young female high school graduates because all the males were gone.
Right.
Now, when they were doing this stream, the scientists were unhappy that they weren't getting enough yield on it, so they were going to show them how to do it. So they zeroed out the machines, and the scientists took over for a shift. They got butkus.
Really?
Nothing. So they sat down, shut up, and let the ladies do their work.
That's interesting. Now,
But at any rate,
how dangerous was this work that they were doing as far as health hazards and stuff like that?
not too bad, because your uranium is what's called an alpha emitter.
Okay.
And an alpha particle, when it is emitted, will stop at your dead skin, so it's not going to penetrate.
Okay.
The only danger is if you inhale it. Then it gets into your lungs.
Okay.
So they were pretty well protected.
They knew the hazards as they were working with it, or
No.
people were dying and they were figuring out what the hazards were?
Well, people weren't dying. They didn't have that problem. But basically, nobody knew what they were doing.
Right.
That was all part of the secrecy thing. But Oak Ridge, to give you an idea of the magnitude of that, was farmland in 1943. In 1945, it was a city of 75,000 people.
Oh, man. That's fast growing.
That is a massive amount of engineering work. Now, I mentioned earlier that the other thing they were to try to do was produce plutonium with Chicago Pile-2.
Okay.
And once they found out they could do that, they went to Hanford, Washington, along the Columbia River.
Okay.
And in 1943, it was farmland. 1945, a city of somewhere between 50 and 60,000 people. And they had built Chicago Pile 3, 4, and 5. They had 3 reactors making plutonium. They had figured a way to separate it properly, and they were producing enough plutonium by the end of the war to make a bomb every maybe 2 to 3 weeks.
Okay. And Hanford's still going, is that
Oh,
correct?
yeah.
And
As
they've got
Oak
one
Ridge.
of the big nuclear waste sites there at Hanford, too. Correct?
Yeah, and as is Oak Ridge.
Oh, okay. They're both. Now, are they dumping nuclear waste at Oak Ridge also?
They're not dumping nuclear waste there, but they're cleaning up at Hanford.
Okay.
It's cleanup, it's not dump.
Oh, they're not. But they were dumping for years and years.
Yeah. And
And the nuclear plant there at Richland, is it still?
that I'm not sure of.
Okay.
That I'm not sure of. But but at any rate, why did they choose those 2 locations? Well, first off, in Oak Ridge, you had the Tennessee Valley Authority, so you had water and power.
Right.
Oak Ridge is a bit away from Knoxville,
Okay.
but close enough that you can get to it. Hanford, along the Columbia River, you have the hydraulic power.
Oh, yeah.
And it's a bit away from everything, but you can get the logistics.
Right.
Okay.
Well, they had a big military installation there also too. I think at Umatilla.
Something I'm not
or
sure on.
someplace right in there. Yeah.
Yeah, but the interesting thing about it is, by the end of the war, the Manhattan Project was using approximately 10% of all electrical power produced in the United States.
10%?
Yes.
Holy smokes!
Now you see why they went to TVA and Columbia River.
Right.
The
Wow.
the electromagnets they were using, they couldn't get copper because it was the wartime.
Okay.
Groves requisitioned, I don't know how many tons of silver from Fort Knox, and the electromagnets were built of silver wire.
Wow. That's a lot of silver too.
Oh yeah, and he returned all but a couple ounces of it.
Really?
So he did his job.
Okay.
Now, you've got Los Alamos, the scientific head putting it together. You've got Oak Ridge making the uranium, and you've got Hanford making the plutonium. So you have all the things you need to put together for the bomb.
But they're not close together.
They're separate. They're diversified deliberately.
Right. Okay. Okay.
So they're moving the uranium and the plutonium into Los Alamos.
Okay.
So now the final component of being able to deliver the weapon is the 509th Composite Group under Paul Tibbets,
Okay.
Colonel Tibbets. He was charged with overseeing the modification of the B-29s so that they could carry the nuclear weapons. And they got the code name Silverplate.
Okay.
And he was in charge of recruiting all the crews, training all the crews, developing all the tactics, doing all the drop testing, and then deploying his unit. Originally, one to England, one to Europe, one to the Pacific, but the European war ended first, so the whole unit went to the Pacific. So basically, there were 15 Silverplate aircraft built.
Okay.
Enola Gay is one, and it's in the National Air and Space Museum, Chantilly, Virginia,
Okay.
the Udvar-Hazy complex. You have Boxcar, which is in the National Museum of the United States Air Force in Dayton, Ohio.
Okay.
And then there is still one more in existence, and that's outside.
Right out here.
Yeah, we have the last silver plate.
Okay.
Now, another interesting story with that. When Tibbets had dropped the 2 bombs, LeMay asked him if he had any more of those. And he said, yeah, I've got one more. And LeMay said, get it over here, not realizing that it was up to Truman to determine whether or not it could be released.
Right.
And the aircraft we have outside was delivered August 9th, 1945,
Okay.
after the second bomb. But if they'd have had to take the third bomb over, they would have taken a case, and we have a device over here that's mocked up to look like the gadget, which was the test device.
Okay.
And it's got a lot of extra wiring on it because if it didn't work, they wanted to know why.
Okay.
But that actually is War Reserve 4. That would have been the weapon.
That one right there.
That would have been the weapon. They put in the case, loaded on that airplane, and flowed the Titian.
Wow. Okay, now you've got a display case here with 2 models of Boxcar and Enola Gay. Enola Gay is the one that did drop the bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki.
No, it dropped Hiroshima.
It dropped Hiroshima. Who dropped? Oh, Boxcar.
Boxcar dropped Nagasaki.
Okay. Okay. And were they spaced? They were spaced apart a day.
3 days.
3 days. Okay.
Yeah.
And they flew out of Tinian.
Yes, Tinian,
which is an island in Micronesia.
Yeah, it's north of Guam. It's the Marianas chain. It's
Right.
Guam, Saipan, Tinian are the main ones.
Right. And then, okay, so we're skipping a little bit of an area here, and that is they were able to develop the bomb through the Manhattan Project and through bringing these pieces together here at Los Alamos, but they did testing prior to, or they had no idea what they were doing when they dropped these bombs?
No, they knew.
Okay. And
So
how much testing was done on these bombs before they...
Okay. One test called Trinity.
Okay.
That was July 16th,
And that took place at White Sands, right?
That's at White Sands. Trinity is on White Sands. Now, they had the gadget. They had the Nagasaki bomb. They had War Reserve 4.
Okay.
And they had Little Boy, which was a uranium bomb. They
Okay.
did not test the uranium bomb. Number one, they were absolutely certain it was going to go.
Okay.
And number two, they only had enough uranium for one bomb.
Okay.
In all that area, all that time, they only had enough uranium for one bomb.
Wow.
So they were getting plutonium. So they tested the plutonium weapon because it was taking whole new concepts together. Uranium is, the Little Boy is what's called a gun-assembled weapon. You have half the critical mass in the tail, half the critical mass in the front end. At the designated altitude, 1,800 feet, a conventional explosive will fire the back half into the front half and hold it together long enough for it to go supercritical and detonate.
Okay.
And they got 15 kilotons out of it. Now, with plutonium, when they tried that, there was no way they could get a long enough run or get it fast enough to keep it from melting down when it got together.
Okay.
So they had to come up with a whole new way to do it.
Okay.
So what they did was, you saw them in that artist display testing spheres.
Right.
So what they wound up doing was they took a sphere of plutonium, about the size of basketball, volleyball, whatever in that range, and in that configuration it was subcritical. Now they put explosives all the way around it.
Okay.
And they detonated them in such a manner that you had a completely symmetrical collapse with almost instantaneous collapse that brought the sphere down to about the size of a tennis ball. It's now supercritical.
Oh, yeah.
So now you've got this explosive lens holding it together long enough for it to detonate. Fat Man.
Okay.
And that was 21 kilotons.
Wow. Amazing. And you've got mock-ups of the bombs.
No, those are actual bombs.
Those are actual bombs.
Yeah, the only mock-up we have out there is Minuteman 1.
Okay.
And it has to be a mock-up because we can't have an assembled missile due to the START treaty. But the warhead on top is real. The reentry vehicle on top is real.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay.
So now we have what looks like a mock-up
Right.
of the gadget, which was the test device they fired at Trinity. But actually, as I said, it's War Reserve 4, and we added the extra wires to show the sensor wiring that they had in addition to the detonation wiring.
Okay. And this is more of a round object.
It's spherical, basically.
And it's spherical, and it's probably 6 foot in diameter. More like kind of like a ball with little portholes and wires and sensors and lots of other stuff to it. But it's a pretty good sized
Weapon,
yeah.
yeah. Now,
And how much would something like that weigh?
they were in the 10,000 pound range.
Okay.
Little boy here, this is actually a little boy. They made a number of little boy and fat men after the war.
Okay.
Now, you'll notice antennas on 4 antennas around it.
Right.
Those are radar altimeters. They wanted it to go off at 1,800 feet.
Okay.
And the reason for that is to maximize the blast effect.
Right.
It's called an airburst. Now, the Japanese also had radar altimeters, so they wanted to be sure that it went off. So you see those little things we call fences sticking up on the back of the boat?
Right.
In front of each one of those is a hole. And under each one of those is a barometric sensor set for 1,800 feet.
Really? Okay.
So there are about 9 of those. So now you've got 4 radar altimeters and about 9 barometric altimeters set to detonate this thing.
It's going to go off at 1,800 feet.
They aren't satisfied. There are about 5 timers in the tail set for 43 seconds, which is time of fall from 30,000 to 40
Wow.
to 1,800 feet. Nobody knows what set it off. Something did.
Right.
I would, if I had to bet on it, I'd bet on a radar altimeter or a timer that's going a little fast, because as rapidly as that's falling, those barometric sensors are going to lag a little bit.
Okay, and now little boy looks more like a
typical bomb.
like a typical bomb,
Yeah.
that you would expect to see. Probably more like about a 400-gallon propane tank with fins on it. Would be the way to describe it.
That would kind of, plus a tail section.
Plus the tail section, yeah. And so, along with all the sensors and everything else to make sure it goes off at the right height. And then you've got
Fat Man. Remember,
Man, which is the round one.
You're working with a sphere that you've got to collapse.
Right.
And it's big. It's probably 6 feet, 7 feet in diameter.
And again, it has all of the altitude sensors just like
everything, just like that one.
Wow. Okay. This is cool. I'm learning a lot about nuclear.
Yeah.
Okay, now we've got a 1942 custom limousine.
Packard. It's a Packard Clipper. Now, it's one of the original limos that they make. You notice they cut it in half.
Right.
And they needed a way to transport the scientists because, cars were kind of in short supply at that point. So you obviously have your front end here.
Right.
And you have your back end here.
Right.
But it's wartime, and you aren't getting any metal.
Okay.
So you have ash, framing, and plywood.
Oh, really?
That's plywood.
So the center 2 doors are, this is a 4-door limousine on a Packard Clipper, but they've extended it, and the middle is wood.
Hence the canvas top.
Okay. Yep. That goes in between the two.
And the 25-mile-an-hour speed limit. You didn't want it falling apart halfway there.
Okay. Now they just welded more into the frame, or the frame?
No,
also?
the frame is wood also. They couldn't get any metal.
Dang. And it's painted kind of a military green color.
Yeah. Now, think about this. Los Alamos is an hour 45 to 2 hours north of us at 75 miles an hour.
Right.
Trinity's about 2.5 hours south of us at 75 miles an hour.
Right.
You're going from Los Alamos to Trinity at 25 miles an hour in this vehicle. Need I say more?
That's taking you 2 days to get it done.
Yeah. Now, if you look up, there's a picture up here of the Trinity base camp.
Okay.
And it has the flagpole on it.
Uh-huh.
And if you'll turn behind you, you'll see what's left of the flag.
Oh, wow. A little bit of wind, huh?
That is just pure old New Mexico wind. No blast or anything, just New Mexico.
Wow.
And then if you look to the just to the left of the flagpole, you'll see one of these limos.
I see it sitting right there. Yep.
It's this one.
How many did they make?
I'm not sure.
Okay.
But it is this one by serial number.
Okay, cool. And then you've got another one over here. This one's
This one is
Plymouth.
an absolutely period correct, model correct and everything of the vehicle they used to transport the pit for the Trinity test from Los Alamos to Trinity.
Okay.
And it was a driver and a guard. Of course, nobody knew what they had, so why would you need more than a single guard? But
Okay.
take a look in the back seat and see the high-tech device that they used for transporting the bomb pit.
Really? We've got a wooden box on a little frame. I guess it's more of a carrying frame with a lid on top of it and a couple of little peepholes in the side. That's their high-tech carrying device.
Yes.
Is it cushioned inside at all?
I don't know. I don't think so.
I'll bet this guy was a little bit nervous driving.
I don't think he had any clues what he had. No, only the scientists knew what they had.
Okay.
The rest of the people knew, this is my job. I don't know what the hell it's for, but this is my job.
Huh. It looks like a box you'd carry some small critters in.
Yeah, a rabbit or something.
He was probably wondering what he was carrying a rabbit that far for.
Now, the decision to drop is one of the things that subsequently to the time period has become somewhat controversial.
Right.
The bottom line answer is that unless you take a look at the history and go back and see the attitudes and the feelings of the people and what had gone on at that time, you cannot really make a decent decision.
And that's true with any point in history.
That is exactly true. So what you've got is the Japanese had absolutely ravaged China.
Right.
War crime after war crime after war crime. They brutally beaten and murdered U.S. prisoners. There was a great deal of hatred back then.
Oh, I was going to say the Japanese were really kind of a brutal people as far as the treatment of war opposition.
Yeah, as far as they were concerned, if you surrendered, you were dirt.
Right.
And in many cases, their people didn't surrender until the last instant, and then a lot of them not until the emperor told them to. So you have this, some people today say, oh, well, we should have given them a demonstration, this, that, and the other thing. But even when they finally surrendered, there were officers, major level, field grade officer level, that attempted a coup against the emperor to keep fighting.
That doesn't surprise me.
Yeah.
They pulled the last still fighting Japanese warrior, or whatever you want to call him, off of the island of Guam, I think, in 1970.
76. I got there in 77. I flew out of there in 77.
Yeah, so he was still fighting the war.
Yeah, I was there in 70 during flying B-52 Arclight missions, and he was there. But the thing about it was that the Japanese military had taken the approach that we're going to put women and children on the beach. We're going to give them sharpened stakes, pitchforks, whatever else we can find, and we expect them to upset the first wave of troops. So if you think about it, if you do something like that, and you put these untrained, well, they had some training, but really ineffective people out there, had we had to invade Japan, we probably would have had to annihilate the entire Japanese race.
That's probably a true statement. I mean, a lot of the battles on these islands and stuff, they took them down to where there wasn't anything green on them, from what I understand.
Yeah, and they
still had massive losses because of the tunnels and other things.
They had to totally annihilate everybody that was there. And in fact, on Okinawa, even some of the civilians were so brainwashed that they jumped off cliffs committing suicide rather than be captured. So I had been volunteering at the National Air and Space Museum in Chantilly, Virginia, where Enola Gay is.
Okay.
And one of the posts we had was out in front of Enola Gay, where you could talk to people and everything. And I had a Japanese gentleman come by and point to the airplane and say, "I'm alive because of that airplane."
Really?
And that's the truth of the matter. the Japanese population probably would have been almost annihilated.
That's an interesting
So
thought,
that's
especially
the perspective.
right.
And we now have film documentation and everything from the Japan War archives that do show them training the women with sharp pay and the children to stand at the beach. Well, you know dang well the GIs are not going to stand there and get scared.
Oh, right. Well, and they employed the children a lot in their efforts. I mean, we had a bunch of balloons that they floated across that were all made in school by the Japanese children that were set to, from what I understand, cause forest fires and that kind of stuff in this country. That was their way.
Yeah,
they thought that they were going to take us over.
Yeah, they were aware of the jet stream. We were not.
Right.
Until the B-29 started flying out of Guam. And when they tried high altitude bombing, that's when they found out that the jet stream was there and that the high altitude bombing was a total loss.
Wow. Okay. But
So
the Japanese had that jet stream thing pretty well mastered to be able to take a balloon and set it off.
well, they
and
knew
get it all the way over here.
They knew about the prevailing westerlies and all that.
Right.
So
Okay.
what you're hearing right now is just a film talking about the Cold War, and I think we can kind of go beyond that if you'd like.
Excuse us.
And now we come down here to the Berlin airlift.
Okay.
Now that occurred in 1948, and what happened was that Russia, Stalin, cut off all the ground routes to Berlin in an attempt to drive the Allies out. So what happened was that the 3 air corridors were open, and there were 3 air corridors that went into 3 different airfields. And early on it was kind of a hit and miss operation, but then they brought in a logistics wizard, and he set it up so that the aircraft would take off out of Frankfurt,
Okay.
or maybe one of the other fields around, would enter the stream and would go in and make an approach at one of the airfields. If he landed, great, they'd unload him and he would swing back into the stream and go back. If he had a missed approach, he would go all the way back to Frankfurt and start over, so they didn't disrupt the stream. And what it amounted to, by the end of the Berlin airlift, Berlin needed 10,000 tons a day to be comfortable.
Okay.
The Allies were delivering 12,000 tons a day.
Okay.
So Stalin could see that not only were they getting what they needed, they were getting backlog built up. He had no choice, so he was humiliated in the Berlin airlift.
It's kind of interesting how we go from Lend-Lease and giving all kinds of aid to Russia during World War II to where Russia becomes our arch enemy, and the whole Cold War thing goes on.
Yeah. Now, here in the 50s, for those of us that were around in the 50s, this is the type of fallout shelter they tried to get people to build in the suburbs, underground. In the cities, there were areas underground in the city, cellar, basements, parking.
I was going to say almost every courthouse and government building and stuff had a fallout shelter sign that was yellow with nuclear, with 3 triangles in it.
Yeah.
And you knew that there was supposedly rations and everything there.
Yeah, and they were trying to encourage people in the suburb to build these. Now, the 50s, the late 40s were kind of fall back, regroup, and figure out what we really had done.
Right.
And then in the 50s, we began, okay, now where do we go from here? So there were a number of things that made good sense. And then there are a few things here that I'll show you that make you scratch your head and say, what the hell were they thinking?
So did a lot of people build these fallout shelters?
Not as many, and nearly as many as they wanted, but yeah, some did. Okay, over here, take a quick look. We're looking at a 16-inch shell for an Iowa-class battleship. There were 4 of them: Iowa, New Jersey, Missouri, and Wisconsin.
And these had nuclear warheads on them?
That is a nuclear warhead.
That's a nuclear warhead. Okay, and I'm looking at a warhead point that is about 5.5 feet tall, probably 14 inches round, and it looks like a bullet tip.
It's actually 16 inches rounds for
16 inches round
for a 16-inch rifle.
I have to just take a guess. But
Yeah.
I try.
Now, you saw how big Fat Man was,
Right?
How big the gadget is. That's the warhead for a Lance, which is a second-generation Army missile, ground-launched missile that was in Germany.
Okay.
So it's smaller.
Oh, it's way smaller. Yeah, because the nuclear part of this is only 3.5 feet by 14 inches?
Yeah,
because it fits inside the 16-inch casing.
Yeah, and that's it. That's
okay.
Now,
and then does it have a charge on the top?
Everything's self-contained.
Everything's self-contained, and does it still have all the barometer stuff to know exactly when to go?
No, they're much better. They're much better. There are a number of things that I'm not at liberty to discuss that play into it.
Okay.
Now, I said there were some things that make you scratch your head and wonder what the hell they were thinking.
Right.
Do you know what a rifle grenade is?
Right.
Yeah, it's a hand grenade with a tube they put over the rifle.
Yeah.
Shoot, and it lobs. How about a nuclear rifle grenade?
No.
Yes. The 106 millimeter recoilless rifle was an anti-tank weapon that was Jeep mounted, and it was recoilless because the backblast was actually vented and shell went forward.
Kind of shot like a bazooka.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
And so they developed what they called Davy Crockett, which was designed to go over the barrel of a 106 recoilless rifle. Had a range of about 6,000 yards. I don't know what the burst radius on it was, but I had a friend that was trained on it, and his comment was, we were told to take appropriate cover.
Yeah, like run as fast as you can, because 6,000 yards isn't all that far to get away from the fallout. And this little thing's probably, 24 inches long?
At the most, 8.
And probably 10 inches round, and looks like a blimp with tails on it, fins on it, and it went on the end of a Jeep-mounted gun.
Now,
wow.
Now this is another one of those. This makes a lot more sense. In the 50s and 60s, the Russians or the Soviets had about a 12-to-1 tank advantage on us.
Okay.
And so what they were worried about was the tanks coming through the Fulda Gap and just totally overwhelming.
Okay.
So the way they were going to stop that was they built these. They called them had the nickname the sewer pipe, but it's a tactical atomic demolition munition. The idea was you'd slide that under a bridge culvert, you'd put it under a bridge, you'd put it anywhere, and you'd detonate it. You'd clear the bridge, you'd clear the culvert, whatever. And in the process, you'd make radioactive tank traps.
Okay.
So that one made a bit of sense, especially considering it.
And this one here looks like a 16 or 18-inch culvert that you'd see underneath a roadway.
A road.
And it's about 6 foot long.
Yeah.
And they just set those up underneath bridges and stuff.
Yeah.
That's pretty cool. No, it's not cool. It's probably pretty hot.
Yeah. Now, here's another one of those scratch-your-head weapons.
Okay. This
is a special atomic demolition munition, or the man-portable nuclear bomb.
Yeah.
It had a case. It was designed for 2 special forces people. It had a rope. That was so you could bail out of the airplane with it and have it ahead below you.
Okay.
And this is actually the bomb.
Okay.
And you have basically a cylinder that's about 12 inches in diameter and another one that's maybe 13 inches in diameter, kind of stacked up. And up on top is a timer.
Okay.
So basically, you set the timer and run like hell.
Yeah. So you paratroop out, you have this thing below you, and then you land, take off your chute, set your timer, and run.
Well, not necessarily right where you land.
Oh.
Okay.
Yeah, because it's got handles on it. It looks like a round case, maybe like a couple of hat cases or something.
Yeah.
That have handles on it that are made out of canvas and a bunch of straps, and so 2 guys could carry it. How much does this thing weigh?
I think it's around Well, there it is.
It says
58
pounds. So
58
two guys with, it'd be like carrying a 5-gallon pail or something.
Yeah.
And
Now, where did this idea come from? Well, let's think back to World War II. The Germans were after heavy water.
okay,
And there was only one place in the world to get heavy water at that time, and that was the Norsk Hydro plant in Norway.
okay,
The British sent in Lancasters after it, and they didn't get it. They sent in a Norwegian team, and they didn't get it. So then they sent in a second Norwegian team, and they did get it.
okay,
So what they're thinking is, if we've got to blow a Norsk Hydro, all you got to do is get one guy in there,
okay,
and you can blow the entire plant. They had to put in a team of demolition experts that would set everything. They finally got it. Side story on that is, once they got it, they couldn't be repaired. They got it so it couldn't be repaired. There was about 1,200 tons of heavy water. So the Germans loaded that into tank cars and loaded them on a barge to take them across to join the German railway system. Norwegian Underground took care of it. In the middle, deepest part of the lake, they blew the barge up and it sank.
oh wow. Okay, now what exactly is heavy water? Is that's water that's got uranium going through it?
No. Heavy water, a lot of people have that misconception. Heavy water is actually the same old water you see everywhere. The difference is the water that everybody's familiar with has one proton
Okay,
and one electron in the atom.
okay,
Heavy water has one proton, one neutron in the nucleus, and one electron.
and is it occurring naturally?
Yes.
Okay,
And then you actually have a third type of hydrogen called tritium, where you have one proton, two neutrons.
okay,
Now that's radioactive.
okay. All of this chemistry.
Chemistry, physics, it all blends together.
And it's not my strong suit.
Okay, we're looking here at the Honest John. It basically looks like a long stovepipe with a bubble head on it, and it's the first generation ground-launched Army rocket. And it's a rocket. It had no guidance.
Okay.
Lance was a missile. It had guidance. This is, you shoot it, and wherever it's aimed, that's where it's going.
Okay. And and you've got elevators to make
Yeah,
it to
you've-
set your trajectory to some degree.
Yeah,
And what was the range on this?
range is about 15 miles.
Oh wow. And it was all set up with nuclear head also.
Yeah.
Now, did they ever launch many of these? I mean, you hear about Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Were there ever any other?
There were tests.
There were tests, but they didn't have actual.
No, there's never been another bomb used in war.
Okay.
But we did have tests, several hundred tests.
Okay. And those tests were conducted.
Bikini, Nevada, the National Test Site in Nevada, things like that.
Okay.
Yeah. Now over here, you have two reentry vehicles.
Okay.
One has been fired and tested, the Mark V reentry vehicle.
Fired and tested, but it didn't go off.
No, it wasn't designed to go off.
Okay.
The missile was fired, it went exo-atmospheric. It was designed to test the reentry trajectory and everything of the missile,
Okay.
of the warhead. So that one's been used, and that's what it looks like before it was used.
Okay.
So you have a pure white
Outer case.
out encasing, and then on the used vehicle, there is a big gap in the blade of material.
Right.
And those kind of gaps caused inaccuracies. So the later blade of material, that doesn't happen.
Okay. Wow. And yeah, and these ones here are, what, 2.5 foot at the base and taper on up like what you'd think of a rocket nose cone. And it sits probably 6.5 feet tall.
Yeah.
Something to that.
Yeah, but
And weighs about 800 pounds.
yeah.
I would have thought that it weighed a lot more than that.
No, as we go around, you'll see how the warheads have shrunk.
Okay.
Now, this is kind of an interesting device. This particular weapon is one of the very, very earlier nuclear weapons that was not Fat Man or Little Boy.
Okay.
I think this is the Mark IV, if I remember
Mark
correctly.
5, MK5.
Mark V. Okay. So the way this thing worked, if a crew was scheduled to fly with a weapon, they would go to the Atomic Energy Commission and check out this bird cage. And now what you have is a cage around a cylinder.
Right.
The cylinder's probably 6 to 8 inches in diameter and probably 2 feet long.
Right.
That is the pit.
Okay.
So what they would do is they would check this out, they'd put it in a pressurized compartment, they'd take off, level off at 3,000 feet, and then whoever was designated would go back, take the cylinder out, carry it back to the bomb bay, open these 2 doors in the front of the bomb, put the cylinder in, close it, go back in, and they'd fly their mission. At 3,000 feet on the way home, they'd reverse the process. So then, when they were done, they'd go sign this back into the Atomic Energy Commission. Now, you have about an 18-inch square grid around that cylinder, and the reason for that is so that when they're in storage, they can't be put close enough together to go critical.
So the guy that walks along a plane that's flying and loads it into the front of this missile, does he get extra pay?
That I don't know.
Or does he just get an insane asylum duty at the end of his tour?
It was probably the bombardier, and he just had his regular flight pay. We have some other weapons here. We do not, by any stretch, have all our weapons here. But we have one weapon that illustrates the penetration weapon, and it's just a massive chunk of steel, as you can see.
Right.
Now, the one behind it is kind of a large bomb.
Right.
That was the first one they put under the wing of a fighter.
Okay, so they were carrying these underneath the wings,
F-84.
too. Okay.
F-84.
And that one's probably, what, 18, 20 foot long?
Yeah, it's the one.
Then it looks like what you'd think of as a bomb.
Yeah, and it's so big, the tail fin had to be folded up so the aircraft could taxi.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Huh.
This was the first generation of fighters on alert in Germany with nuclear weapons.
And about what year was that?
I would say early to mid-50s.
Okay.
That's an estimate.
Right.
Now, this little gem here is another one of those ones that says, what the hell were they thinking? But then when you start thinking about it, you can understand where it came from.
Okay.
So think back to World War II.
Okay.
You had hundreds of airplanes attacking a city. So how do you counter hundreds of airplanes, a big fleet? You have a very small air-launched nuclear rocket that you lob into the middle of their formation and detonate.
Really?
Yes, that's the MB-1 Genie. And this was actually on alert in the 50s on F-89 Scorpion aircraft.
Okay.
Now, let's step back. You know, World War II, hundreds of airplanes. And then all of a sudden they started thinking, wait a minute. Now it's one airplane, 4 cities. Maybe this isn't such a good idea.
Right.
So
yeah, but when you've got a whole group of planes, it does make a certain amount of sense.
Yeah, it makes sense. But the thing was, they retired it because they realized that they didn't have that anymore.
Right.
Now there was another weapon that's outside, the IM-99 Bomark, which was a long-range intercept missile. And it was rocket-launched, ramjet propelled. The A version went 250 miles, the B version went 460 miles, and they were nuclear tipped also.
Okay.
And on top of that, then there's the Nike Hercules, which had the capability of a nuclear tip.
Wow, there's a lot more nuclear stuff flying around than what I ever even thought about.
Yeah. Okay, now, airborne alert. There were basically 5 orbits. And we have here in front of us a chart of what are called broken arrows. Now, these broken arrow is a code word for irreparable damage or destruction of a nuclear weapon.
Okay.
So when you have an incident like this, like the Palomares incident in Spain, or the Thule incident in Greenland, They were called broken arrows.
Okay.
So now the Palomares incident occurred in what was known as the Mediterranean orbit.
Okay.
They were going squares around the Mediterranean. They were refueling over Spain, friendly territory. Tankers coming up out of Spain. That's why they were refueling there. So we'll go over there in just a minute. But the idea is when you're refueling a B-52 behind a tanker, you're about 17 feet behind them.
That's all?
Your nose is up underneath them.
Okay.
So the boom is behind the pilots, about the middle of the upper deck. And when you make contact and they start pumping fuel, the electronic warfare officer has to get out of his seat, come forward, and check for no leaks.
Okay.
So it's behind the pilot. So you're up in under the tanker, and your boom length is about 17 feet when you're in the green.
That's crazy, isn't it?
It's routine.
You'd think that any turbulence would take care of that 17-foot distance. Yeah, I've actually seen that happening in the air, like over Wyoming. I've seen it a couple of different times where you can see the plane and the...
Yeah, but you can see the nose is right up under the air.
Yeah, it is.
And to give you an idea, turbulence, I went out for to qualify as a pilot, you have to go out, take off at max gross weight.
All right.
Go out at night, hit a tanker, unload a minimum of 70,000 pounds, and come within 5,000 pounds of maximum gross weight.
Okay.
So the night for my practice for that, I went out, hit the tanker, locked on. The entire way was in and out of clouds, in and out of turbulence, just staying there neat. Go out on my check ride, clank, have to go back and redo it.
Yeah, that just is amazing.
But so you can see how an accident might happen.
Right, right.
When the accident happened, both airplanes broke up.
Okay.
Now, the B-52s in this configuration were carrying 4 of these B-28 bombs.
Okay.
They 2 lower, 2 upper. And that filled the forward bomb bay. So when the accident happened, these weapons broke loose. So at any rate, he's got 4 of these.
Right.
And believe it or not, these are designed to be released from 500 feet. And in fact, we practice that routinely.
Okay.
So when they broke up at high altitude, 2 of the weapons, these 2, the parachutes opened on. And you see the crushed nose.
Right.
And that's all designed into it for when you drop it from 500 feet. So perfectly normal. The far one landed on the ground, picked it up right away. This one went into the ocean.
Okay.
The admiral in charge of the first group that was looking for it decided he was going to start at shore and work his way out. 6 weeks later, a new group comes in, and this time the person in charge listens to the locals. 3 locals saw it go in. 1 was a fisherman who was out in the water,
Okay.
and 2 on shore. And they had an individual that then triangulated those, and they picked it up in about a day and a half.
Really?
So bottom line to that was, you may want to listen to the locals. They might know something.
Right. And these are the 2 actual bombs.
Bombs.
Okay, and there's a lot more to the story as far as cleanup and some of that kind of stuff.
Oh, yeah. Now, 2 of them, the parachute didn't open on, and they functioned exactly as they were supposed to. The high explosive, they knew the high explosive was going to go off if that happened.
Right.
But they had it built in such a way that there was no way it could go nuclear.
Okay.
So it's what they call low order or single point safe.
Okay.
And at that point, what you have is basically a dirty bomb.
Okay.
And that's what they had, and that's what they had to clean up.
Yeah, and that was quite a cleanup from what I understand.
Yeah. Now, if you look up directly above you,
Right.
that is the 2nd generation air-launched missile from a B-52.
Okay.
First generation's outside, the AGM-28. This is the SHRAM missile, short-range attack missile. had a range of 60 to 80 miles. And if you look at the picture there, you see a rotary launcher. You see 3 of them. There are
Right.
actually 8 of them on there.
Okay.
So they have 8 of those, and then you can see the 2 lower weapons in the forward bay.
Right.
So that particular aircraft is configured with 12 weapons.
Wow. And what kind of damage are you talking about with these warheads? We know Hiroshima and Nagasaki, but something like this that you're carrying 12 of them on a plane.
There are only a certain number of warheads we're allowed to talk about.
Okay.
I can tell you that's a megaton class weapon.
Okay.
Megaton class. And I can tell you that Fat Man was 21 kilotons.
So that'd do more. Wow.
That's orders of magnitude more. I'm not sure what the yield of this is. I never personally worked with it. I've had these on alert personally. I had to know what they were.
Okay.
Now, so that's the short-range attack missile. Now, up top there, you see a huge ballistic missile.
Uh-huh.
And
we're talking huge. It's 50 foot long.
It is a sea-launched ballistic missile, launches from underwater.
Off of a submarine.
Off of a submarine. It is the previous generation's submarine-launched missile. The current generation, the Trident D5, is bigger.
Really?
Both of them can carry up to 8 warheads independently targetable.
That's unbelievable.
There's the nose cone cover for it.
Thing's huge.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we're talking, what, 7 foot in diameter, but this thing's, it's got to be 40 foot long, doesn't it?
Yeah. Now this is a model of the Ohio class submarine. This is our current ballistic missile submarine. It was designed with 24 tubes. 24 missiles. This was used in the Poseidon class submarines, the Franklin class, and they were designed with 16 tubes.
Okay, and you've got a model of the Ohio submarine here, and there's hatches in the top that open up for these missiles to come out of.
Yeah, the missiles.
Now, is this a nuclear submarine as far as the way
Yes,
that it's powered?
Absolutely.
Okay.
So these things would leave port, submerge. Nobody'd see them for 90 days until they surfaced going into port.
Really? And what depth would they kind of hang out at? Just wherever they wanted to be?
Well, I'm quite sure they had patrol areas and everything, but obviously they're not going to give any information on that.
Okay.
I have absolutely no idea.
Okay.
I have a concept of what they might be able to do, but I have no idea.
I just was kind of curious if they hung out at like 100 feet or 1,000 feet.
Yeah.
So those guys, they went underwater for 90 days straight.
Yeah.
Wow.
And so when the missile is fired, it comes up in a big bubble of steam.
Uh-huh.
When it breaks the surface, the rocket engine ignites and off it goes.
Okay. So it's kind of a 2-stage deal.
Mm-hmm. Actually, you got 2 rocket stages.
Okay.
So you have the ejection stage, and then you have the normal missile staging.
Wow. That is just... And how exactly does the propulsion system and stuff work like on these nuclear subs? They've got nuclear ships too, right? That can go out for the 90 days or... The
aircraft carriers, the ballistic missile submarines, and the fast attack submarines are nuclear.
Okay.
The rest of them are not.
Okay. They're still running diesel?
Yeah.
Okay.
Some are running diesel boilers, some are running diesel turbine. But these run a nuclear reactor, just like a nuclear reactor stateside, and they're making electricity.
Okay.
And oh, by the way, since we're making electricity, we can make oxygen. We can purify water.
Okay.
We got heat, we can purify water. And we got a carbon dioxide scrubber, so we're good to go.
That's just amazing that something can stay underwater for 90 days.
Yeah, and what they call the fast attack submarines are the ones that are, go out and attack other things. And they jokingly call those big black and never come back.
Okay.
Now, I'm going to get into some detail here and shut me off if it's not something you want to hear. But you see two weapons here.
Okay.
One is about an 15-foot, looks like a
Right.
silver bullet.
Yes.
And that's actually what we nicknamed it as a crew.
Okay.
B-52 would carry 4 of those, and I've been on alert with them. But it is the current tactical weapon. So it's been around since '68.
Wow.
Now,
And they're still using it.
I had Mod 0. This is Mod, that's a Mod 0,
Okay.
which I had. We're now to Mod 12.
Okay.
Now, the B-83 replaced the B-28. It's a megaton class weapon. This is kiloton class.
Okay.
And these are the only 2 gravity weapons in the inventory.
Okay. Gravity means they're not self-propelled.
They're dropped.
They're just dropped.
And the only airplane that can, the only airplanes that can successfully drop them are the B-2, the stealth fighters. The F-16 can drop them because it can come in low, but the B-52, the B-1, no way to survive the.
Okay.
Now, in our military, we have 2 policies. One is called the 2-man policy. Anytime anybody is around a nuclear weapon or a nuclear armed vehicle, you have to have 2 people equally qualified to the job to be done to be present.
Okay.
And they use a challenge and response checklist. If you have to gain access to an aircraft compartment that has mission material on board, not only do you have to have the 2 people, but you have to have the 2 officers.
Okay.
So if my B-52 needed work, one of the 5 primary crew, 2 of the 5 primary crew members had to go sit in the cockpit. Either that or we had to uncock it and pull the box off.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
Now, in keeping with that 2-man policy, when these weapons are sitting in the weapons bay, they're blivets. They know nothing.
Right.
They're absolutely dumb. So now, to make them usable, and you can see here a bunch of different electronic boxes.
Right.
They morph. You can tell, is it, age difference and everything. But basically, you have 2 custodians.
Okay.
2A custodians, 2B custodians. The A custodians would come in and they'd put a code into the machine.
Okay.
The machine would then translate that code to what's to go into the weapon.
Okay.
So the A custodians have a code, but it's not what the weapon wants to hear, so there's no way they can mess with it.
Okay.
The B custodians come in and they put their code in, and again the machine translates it to what the weapon's looking for. Now the weapon can be loaded.
So it takes 2 guys to load the weapon.
It takes 2 guys to prepare the weapon for load.
Oh, okay.
So now you're going to have a weapons load team come out and load the weapon.
Okay.
So once the weapon's on the airplane, and I'm talking about a B-52 now, and when I flew them it was a 6-man crew. It's now a 5-man crew, but it was a 6-man crew. The weapon would be loaded on the aircraft. And we would do a pre-flight every time we went on alert and look at the weapons and everything. And when you went in, you had your interior pre-flight. You had a number of switches, boxes, handles that had to be safety wire and sealed. So now let's say you get a code that says, go drop your weapon. Well, first off, before you can do anything, you have to decode the message. And pretty much, even though it says 2 primary crew members, everybody on the crew has to agree that, that's what it means.
Okay.
So now, how do we get the weapon off? Well, the first step is the electronic warfare officer has to break a safety wire and seal down by his foot and pull a handle.
Okay.
That handle is connected to a cable that is actually physically pulling a pin from the release mechanism. That pin's in, that bomb's going nowhere.
Okay.
Short of breakup of the aircraft.
Right.
So he pulls that pin. Now, the radar navigator has to break a safety wire and seal, open a box, connect the cannon plug. Now you can talk to the weapon because you've been totally isolated from the weapon.
Okay.
From there, in the message that tells you to go, you've got to decode another alphanumeric sequence that's called a permissive access link. So the bomb is inert until the navigator puts that in the bomb and it says, oh, I've been authorized to go.
Okay.
So now the next step is, behind the pilot, there's another box, safety wired and sealed, and they're called the pilot's readiness switches. So you put those up. At this point, the radar can now break a safety wire and seal on the safe arm switch and take it from safe to arm.
That's not difficult at all.
That's the type of safety we had built in.
I was going to say, that's pretty secure.
And that's why we did it. Now, obviously, with the B-2 and with a single seat fighter, the operation is different.
Right.
But that type of stuff.
Huh. That's amazing. That's a lot of security.
Yeah. And what you had was this, at SAC Cruise, we were incredibly well trained.
Right. No, you'd have to be.
Every time we went on alert, we got tested on what was called positive control. Every month on alert, we got tested on weapons and doctrine and what to do if and all that stuff.
Wow. That's amazing.
And that would include aircraft emergency procedures, aircraft procedures. Anything was fair game. Okay, as you walk straight out, you see the sail with a 645 on it.
Right. That's off the nuclear sub.
That is off the SSBN Polk,
Okay.
a Franklin-class submarine.
Okay.
So now as we go around the yard, over here, you see an F-16.
Okay.
That's an A model past its useful life, so we have it on display. And you'll notice under the wing there's a B-61.
Okay.
So there's one on the other side, so that's a nuclear-capable aircraft. If you come out a little further, you see a silver airplane.
Right.
That's a MiG-23.
Okay, that's the MiG.
That's
okay.
a MiG-23, and certain versions of that are nuclear capable.
Okay. And that's a Russian plane.
Yes.
Yes.
Now, you see the big plane up on the pedestal?
Right.
That's an F-105.
Okay.
Now, that was built as a purpose-built, low-level, supersonic nuclear bomber
Okay.
in the late 50s, early 60s. And in 1960, after Francis Powers was shot down, they decided that they could no longer go in high altitude, they had to go in low altitude.
Okay.
And there was a time period between when they had developed the bombs to where we could release them at 500 feet and the time they were high altitude released, that they had to come up with a new way to deliver them. And they came up with a low altitude bombing system. The F-105, for instance, would come in supersonic and at a specified point would pull up in a 4G pull-up. Somewhere along that pull-up, his computer would release the weapon forward.
Okay.
And he would continue over the top, roll over, and head back the other way.
Okay.
That was called the Labs maneuver,
Okay.
toss bombing.
Huh.
So then, if we step out just a little further, we see a Navy A-7. Now, that doesn't look exactly like the ones you normally see because that's a two-seat variant.
Okay.
But the A-7 was a Navy aircraft that was nuclear capable, and the Air Force and the Navy both used them.
Okay.
Now, the propeller airplane is a B-29 silver plate.
Okay. That's the one you were talking about.
It's number 15.
Okay.
Now, if you look straight across, you'll see a Nike Hercules missile.
Okay.
That over there, just to the left of it, is an SA-2 guide rail, Soviet missile.
Okay.
Now, if you look out there, you can see kind of a cannon.
Right.
That's atomic ante, the nuclear cannon. There were 20 of them made. We got one of them.
Okay.
The silver tank out there is a tank from a B-58.
Okay.
In front of you is a B-52. Now
That's what you flew.
That's what I flew.
Okay.
Now, that's a special airplane. That was assigned to the Atomic Energy Commission.
Okay.
So it is the only airplane that has actually dropped live armed nuclear weapons
It has actually dropped them.
in testing.
Wow. Okay.
Now, over there is a B-47. That's kind of the precursor to the B-52.
Okay.
And believe it or not, for about a year and a half, they did the Labs maneuver.
Okay. Really?
Yes.
That plane did?
Yeah. It's
Wow.
it's a six-engine jet bomber. Now, off to the side there, the first missile you see is the Peacekeeper. That was our most modern missile, 10 warheads and The Soviets were petrified of it. It was the first thing to go in the START treaty.
Okay.
Next to it is the Titan missile, Titan II.
Okay. And we went through the Titan missile silo in Tucson, south of Tucson.
Okay. Titan II is the King Kong missile, 13,500 mile range, 9 megaton warhead.
Okay.
It had one big problem. It was liquid fueled with unsymmetrical dimethylhydrazine and fuming nitric oxide, both of which are toxic and explosive.
Great.
Yeah. Beyond that, you'll see have a missile with a roundel on it.
Uh-huh.
That's actually the Thor missile, and we had an agreement with the British. We'd provide the missile and the parts, and they'd provide the basing and the crews in
Okay.
England. The one standing up is the Minuteman I that I told you about.
Okay.
And then the one laying down is the Polaris A3, which is the missile that was prior to the Trident,
Thank you, sir.
to the Poseidon missiles. So that was the original sub-launch cruise missile. Now, as we come in here, this is where we start seeing the culture
Okay.
that's developing. You see things like failsafe. Movies that the Russians are coming, they don't have the thing, but that was atomic testing, and the ants grew to giant sizes and everything.
Right, right.
So you have all these movies that came out.
The Russians are coming. The Russians are coming. Failsafe. The Bedford incident. Follow me, boys. Okay.
Now we have, there is more to the culture than just the movies and everything. Paul Newman was a huge advocate of nuclear power.
Okay.
And this is his Formula One race car, and you can see he was pumping nuclear power.
Right. But this was run with gasoline.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah.
Yeah, they've talked about nuclear cars and stuff for a long time, and how little it would take to make them run forever, and
Well, that
kind of like the nuclear subs, I guess, that your car would run forever on fusion.
you've got a shielding problem, basically.
You've got a what?
Shielding problem.
Oh, okay, right.
Yeah. So that's part of it. For instance, plutonium is poisonous and radioactive.
Right. And we've got a display over here of the Boy Scouts Nuclear Science Merit Badge, Atomic Energy Merit Badge, and so I guess the Scouts were kind of into the nuclear thing for a while.
Yeah.
And then you've got some other what are these, sports jerseys?
Yeah, bowling teams.
Bowling teams, skis that are called atomics, just some different clothing and sports team memorabilia.
And then as we move on out, Close Encounter with the Third Kind.
Oh, is that what that is?
It may be, or it may be Star Wars. I'm not sure.
I don't know. I'm not enough into the sci-fi stuff to...
But now, there was a nuclear surface ship that was tested. It was never meant to be profitable, and it never was.
Okay.
But it was a combined cargo and passenger ship. And so here are your menus and some of the things
Okay.
from that.
And that was called the Savannah?
Yes, NS Savannah.
Okay.
Now
And here
we-
you got a little chemistry set that's atomic energy.
Yeah, it had
From
uranium,
1955.
uranium and all kinds of good stuff.
Yeah, the things you could play with back when back
yeah.
in the day.
Back in the day, yeah. And then here you have some of the quackery that begins to come out earlier. This is in the 30s, early 40s, when they had, even before that, when they started discovering radium, and they would have radium-infused water that would cure your headache
Right, right.
and all this stuff.
But
So,
it didn't cure it by death, right?
yeah, no, we won't go there.
Spot remover, some uranium spot or radium spot remover.
You can see all
Embalming fluid.
you can see all the quackery that was going on.
Yeah, but it had to have been pretty detrimental to health as far as long term.
Oh yeah, yeah.
And then you have a DeLorean in here.
Yeah, that's just kind of cool because of the
Back
flux
to the
capacitor.
future.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Back to the Future flux capacitor.
But still, it's pretty cool to have a DeLorean.
Yeah. We also have displays of what they're doing with uranium. Uranium is not toxic, but toxic. If the dust gets in your lungs, as it decays, that can cause damage to the lungs.
Right.
So what these various schools are doing, the local schools, they're working on masking and protection so that the people don't inhale it.
Okay.
So this is some of the research work that's being done by the local universities.
Okay, and you've got a hands-on area back here for the kids.
Yeah.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah, Pinocchio is a machine that we have that illustrates what a chain reaction looks like.
Okay.
But they say it's out of order, which means the compressor's probably down.
Okay. But it's got a bunch of ping pong balls in it that I guess...
Yeah, what happens is in a chain reaction, neutron hits a nucleus, 2 more neutrons come out, and they set off things. And that just kind of illustrates that every time a ping pong ball crosses a sensor, it fires.
Okay. And then you have a big pendulum here.
Well, actually, this is designed to show periods,
Okay.
the periods of a pendulum. And you can see it.
Oh.
You can see the different lengths of the period and how it makes S curves and stuff.
Right. That's cool.
And then he's riding a bike to turn a drill or light a light.
Okay, so it's got a little generator in it.
Yeah, and we have some stuff on nanotechnology over here.
Okay.
And
So lots of things for kids to do.
yeah.
Well, it's kind of intriguing for adults too.
Oh, yeah. When we set those up, we play.
That's good. What, this direction?
Yeah.
Okay.
Now, some other things, a part of the culture, stamps.
Stamps.
All over the world, stamps with nuclear themes on them.
Really? This is kind of a neat display. You've got a computer screen that's showing lots of different stamps, all with the little nuclear atom in them. Who would have thought that they have that many stamps?
Well, you look at all the postcards and envelopes.
That's amazing.
And then Post Office Box 1663 was the code for Los Alamos.
Okay.
And interesting story on that, Deborah McKibben was the individual that was charged from 1942 to 1962 controlling access to Los Alamos.
Okay.
If you wanted to get to Los Alamos, you went through Deborah McKibben.
Okay.
And during the war, she put in a request for 100 Sears catalogs. And Sears came back and said, why would a single post office box need 100 catalogs? She said, it's wartime.
Yeah.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Yeah.
Now, this is an interesting device. This is how they transport low-level nuclear waste. That would mean like a contaminated lab coat,
Okay.
something like that. They put them in these barrels.
And they look like 55-gallon drums.
They are basically metal 55-gallon drums. Then they put it in this thing.
Okay.
And this has been tested by Sandia. It's been dropped over 100 feet. It's been tried to explode. It's indestructible, basically.
So you have how many 55-gallon drums inside of this?
I think we have a configuration on it over here.
And then it's a great big cylinder that's probably 10 foot round.
Yeah, and 3 of them.
And 3 of them fit on a semi-truck. And they're probably 10 feet tall, 8 feet tall. They're up there.
Yeah.
And then they put the 55-gallon drums inside. And then what is in the outer casing?
It's material, protective material.
Like lead? Or
No, it's packaging that's been developed to prevent damage from explosions, fire, dropping.
trucks tipping over? Or
Yeah,
like
anything like that, yeah.
Okay, and then do they bury this whole
No,
system?
they buried the drums.
They just bury the drums.
Yeah.
Okay. Wow. That's kind of a cool thing.
Yeah. And in fact, you can see how they would
Oh, yeah.
pack the drums there.
Okay.
Now,
So they put clothing and all that the low level stuff, like you
Yeah.
were saying. Yeah. Okay.
now let's talk about the accidents or incidents.
Okay.
3 Mile Island was actually the first one, and I am not actually sure of what happened inside.
Okay.
But the net result was the containment vessel worked perfectly, and the entire result of the accident was a small amount of radioactive gas being released.
Okay.
So essentially it was a non-event.
Right. But they made it out to be a big one.
Yeah,
Okay.
caused the anti-nuclear people.
Right. Right.
Okay, now let's get to Fukushima. This was something that caught people off guard, although it should not have.
Okay.
Basically what happened in Fukushima was the earthquake hit,
Right.
created a tsunami.
Right.
The tsunami came into the plant and it shorted out the water pumps that provided the cooling for the reactor.
Right.
So once they shut down, the reactor overheated and melted down.
Right.
That created a problem. Now they've dealt with that. They have gravity feed,
Oh, water.
water.
Okay.
So that doesn't happen. Now Chernobyl, that's a horse of a different color. That's arrogance, ignorance, stupidity, and delusions of adequacy.
Okay.
The basic reactor design to begin with had 3 major flaws. And the Russians had asked British scientists to come in and take a look at it, and they identified the 3 flaws. The number 1 flaw was insufficient shielding.
Okay.
Number 2 flaw was that it had the potential to cavitate. And what that means is that if the pile reached a certain temperature, the water would flash off as steam and you would have no cooling.
Okay.
And then the third major design error was on the control rods, which are designed to control the number of neutrons available to the reaction. They had graphite tips to lubricate the slides.
Okay.
Well, when you put them down, those graphite tips acted as moderators. So actually you created a spike of neutrons before you started to control them.
Okay.
So now, what went wrong? Well, Friday afternoon, a trained crew was supposed to make a test.
Okay.
Now, the interesting thing about that test they were doing, 2 years before, they had done the same test at a reactor near St. Petersburg. And all the Soviet reactors were approximately the same design.
Right.
Basic,
You would figure that.
all the same design. So when they did it, they got the spike, but because they'd been trained, they were able to control it.
Okay.
So they didn't get the flash off and they didn't get the meltdown. But because of Soviet secrecy, they never told anybody else about it.
Wow.
So when the guy did it at Chernobyl, the afternoon crew, life happens and they didn't get it done. So the evening boss came in and he decided he was going to show them how good he was. Untrained, unqualified, too stupid to do the test. But he went ahead and did it. And as they did the test, they spiked the neutrons, they cavitated, they melted down.
Wow.
So the bottom line on nuclear energy is, Fukushima was one of those ones that was, we got caught with our pants down.
Right.
We learned, we now know better. 3 Mile Island was, we designed that right, everything worked perfectly. The Chernobyl points out exactly what it takes to run a nuclear power plant safely. Look at the Navy. From 1955 to the present day, they have been running nuclear reactors on submarines and aircraft carriers.
Right.
Not a single incident even. And the reason for that is they have good policies and procedures.
Right.
And they ruthlessly enforce those policies and procedures. Now, that's not to say policies and procedures can't change and grow as we learn.
Right, right.
Example, Fukushima. But if you are going to safely run a reactor, you have to have good policies and procedures, and you have to have the discipline to run it. And that's where the commercial world breaks down. There are too many idiots out there that think they know better.
Well, and how many nuclear plants are actually up and running still? They've kind of shut most of them down, haven't they?
There are some shut down, but there's some new ones building.
I was going to say, I think they're trying to build a new one in southwestern Wyoming.
Yeah, now they're experimenting with what they call small modular reactors.
Okay.
And there was a thing about it in the paper today that I looked at, and they're bad-mouthing it, but yeah, it's going through growing pains. No way around it. It's going to happen.
And I've kind of been hearing some things about not uranium, but I think therminium?
Thorium.
Thorium, that's what it is, yes.
Yes, well,
and that
we will
seems
get
to
there.
be kind of promising.
We will get there in a moment.
Okay.
Okay. This is one of the things that you try to make people stop and think.
Yeah.
Okay, energy options. What are our options? There are only two ways to make electricity. One is to turn a generator,
Right.
and the second is with a photovoltaic cell.
Okay.
So now how do we do it? Well, let's start with hydroelectric power. That's kind of your basics. Oh, that's free, clean power, all that. Think of how many millions of acres are flooded out when you build that dam.
Right.
And now you look at the Hoover Dam with Lake Mead running out of water so that they can't even run the hydroelectric plant.
Right. Right.
So hydroelectric, nice, but certainly not the panacea, especially with climate change.
Right. Right.
Now,
But the other side of that is when you create a dam, you create a lot of fish habitat,
yeah.
recreation, and some other things with it.
There are pluses and minuses to it.
It definitely hurts like salmon runs and some of that type of stuff.
It also hurts farmland and
Right.
things like that. So it's a good power generator, but it certainly is not foolproof.
Right. Right.
So, okay, what is another way? Fossil fuels, coal, oil, natural gas. Yeah, that's kind of what we're using right now, but then that has the detriment of, especially with coal, pollution.
Right.
And you're getting carbon dioxide out of each one of these, which is a greenhouse gas. So they certainly have their problems. Nuclear energy. Well, just back up for a second. The way you generate power with this is you run water over a turbine,
Right.
which turns a generator.
Right.
With these, with fossil fuels, you create steam, which runs a turbine, turns a generator.
Right.
Nuclear energy. Again, the pros are it's clean and everything, but then you've got your spent fuel. How do you
Right.
deal with that? And part of the problem with that is due to Carter saying we're not going to reprocess fuel. Europe reprocesses fuel and they have a much, much smaller volume.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Okay. I was not aware of that.
So, waste storage, heat and stuff, but basically you're generating heat, you're making steam, you're turning a turbine.
Okay.
So now we come to solar. And again, solar is not constant, although there are ways to make it better. One way that it makes power is with the photovoltaic.
Right.
So that's a direct conversion of solar cells that people are used to seeing. But there is actually another way to use solar, and you get a much longer lasting electrical power grid. And the way that works is, then they've got a couple of these in the desert, where you have a whole circle of mirrors that are focused on a tower about 1,500 feet up.
Okay.
That tower is what's called a heat sink. And they'll heat that to 2,500, 3,000 degrees during the day. And so you run the water through there. You can run it through at night because it's cooling down, but so you can make your steam and run it that way. So that's the two ways to make it with solar. Wind is actually, with the propellers, you're direct driving your generators.
Right. Right.
So you either turn something or you focus sun on it, one of the two.
Right. And nuclear is not a bad way, really.
No.
But
And we have here, starting with the earliest designs, Gen 1, Chicago Pile 1, all the way around to some of the new stuff, and they're talking about small modular reactors. And what you're looking at is basically a very simple system, very low maintenance, very low requirements, and it will run a small area.
Okay.
So, for instance, Albuquerque might have a few of these placed around, and Albuquerque has power.
Right.
Out on the Indian reservation where you're isolated, you run a couple of these, people have power. And they're good for about 60 years.
Really? And that's what they're developing right now?
That's what they're working on. Now, and some people are showing them buried, some people are showing them buildings like this, but there's still a lot of issues to be resolved with.
Right.
But that's a potential. Here's a model of the NS Savannah. And as you can see, it was built as a fairly sleek ship, not a big bulk cargo carrier and stuff like that.
And it was all nuclear powered.
Yeah, you can see the...
Yep, they've got it all set up here so with the side cut out of the model so that you can see just how everything was set up in there. That is cool.
Now, you mentioned thorium.
Yes.
Voila, thorium.
Oh, we got a whole display.
Yes, this is sponsored by the Thorium Consortium. They send everything in and we put it together.
Okay.
And the thing about thorium is that it cannot melt down.
Right.
So that you keep putting the fuel in and it goes through. And it has less fuel, much shorter half-lives.
But it doesn't have the military capabilities.
Right.
Right. So that's I think that what I have kind of heard is that because it didn't have the military capabilities, it wasn't developed. The military was the reason that a lot of nuclear was developed to begin with, and thorium kind of got overlooked.
Oak Ridge had a thorium reactor in 1960.
Oh, did they? And that turned out to not be so successful, didn't it?
Well, as my understanding, it was okay, but they wanted the other stuff because, that would take more development.
Right. Yeah, thorium is I just got through watching a YouTube thing on thorium, and they were saying that it had some not failures, but there was some technicalities with making it react the way that they wanted it to.
There's a lot of technicalities on it.
And they're still developing some of those.
And now this display is set up by a uranium mining company.
Okay.
And as I mentioned earlier, the gaseous diffusion became the primary way of enriching after the war.
Okay.
Well, now centrifuges have become the primary way. But again, you're just employing that little wee tiny 3 atomic mass unit difference in weight.
Okay.
To get a physical separation, because that's the only way you can separate them.
Okay.
So this is how they do it. They go to uranium hexafluoride, ionize it, and actually they don't even have to ionize it now. That was for the other. And as I said before, U-235 is only 0.7% of natural uranium.
Okay. That's not much.
Mainly because it's deteriorated. Okay, now we have a detail on the German program here. And basically, Heisenberg was in charge of the major portion of it, but the Army, in their jealousy, had to have a more portion of it. And he was using cubes like that.
Okay.
Of uranium.
And we're looking at about a 2-inch cube.
Yeah. And that's actually one of his cubes.
Oh, that's one of the actual cubes.
Yes. And here is how he was trying to do it. He was suspending the cubes into heavy water and stuff.
Okay.
Now the Canadians do use heavy water reactors. The U.S. reactors all use graphite.
Okay.
Now let's take a quick bend this way and we'll catch the last two areas. Nuclear medicine is a huge spin-off.
Right.
Of nuclear. Now you have the tracers, you have the ability to inject tracers, you have the ability to actually inject killers. For instance, iodine-123 they use for diagnosing a thyroid issue.
Right.
Iodine 133 they put in, and it goes to the thyroid and kills it.
Okay.
So you can see how learning to use isotopes, learning iodine goes to the thyroid. Other minerals go to other parts of the body. So that's how they can use it. Yet gamma imaging, X-ray fluorescence, all big spin-offs. And then, of course, you get the quackery.
Yeah. You've got a big machine here that is all made out of oak and has a bunch of dials and...
It's all designed to shock somebody.
Right. It's an impressive looking thing.
And as is this. This is the same thing. I don't know if this is working, but...
Oh, yeah.
You can see how it's sparking.
Uh-huh.
And this they thought was neat stuff.
Huh.
Now, as we come on around...
But like your MRIs and all that are based off of nuclear too, aren't they? Or
MRI
CAT scans?
originally started off as nuclear magnetic resonance.
Okay.
But they decided that was not a good name.
Okay.
So they went to magnetic resonance imaging. Basically, you're using a magnet to cause resonance within the nucleus of the atom.
Okay.
X-ray machine, that's an X-ray tube.
Really? 1923. Doesn't look anything like the ones that I've seen lately.
No. And here's where we start to get into some more quackery with the radium the radium infused water and all that stuff. Over here, Geiger counters.
Oh, a whole thing of Geiger counters.
Various Geiger counters. Now we come up with the fun stuff. The clicking you hear is a Geiger counter, and the next clicking you hear comes from a gasoline mantle that they used.
Like a Coleman lantern.
Yeah.
Yeah, the little sock that the light.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Now the next thing you see is a salt shaker. It's orange.
Fiesta ware.
Oh,
wow. That's really giving off a lot.
The orange in the glaze is coming from uranium.
Really? Okay.
Yeah. Yes.
And what's doing it with the mantles?
I think there's an americium or thorium in it. I'm not sure.
Okay.
I think it's thorium.
And a Geiger counter just measures how much radiation's being emitted.
Yeah. And
listen to this Fiesta ware. That's amazing.
Basically what you're getting is the radioactive decay of the uranium.
Okay.
And then here you see some of the games, and then the radium girls, where they would use very fine paintbrushes, tip them on their lips, wet lips and stuff, and then put the little dots on the radium dials. And it had some very bad results.
Yeah, radium lipsticks.
Yeah.
And perfumes. And now, would that glow, or what was the purpose for that?
I don't know, other than the fact that radium was a big plaything.
Okay.
And then you see some of the other things, like your fire detector has americium in it.
Okay.
And that's radioactive. You can see some more of the Fiesta ware over there. Some of these big jugs are what they used to put water in. And the area we're in right now is called Radiation 101. And what people need to realize is that there's radiation around you all the time, every day.
Right.
And
the radon gas was a big thing for a while with houses and stuff.
Probably the most damaging is the ultraviolet.
Okay.
Coming from the sun. And the higher you get in altitude, like we're about 5,000 feet, 6,000 feet here, it's much more intense than it is at sea level.
Right.
Less atmosphere to dispel it.
Sunburns happen a lot quicker at this altitude.
Oh, yes. You do not go outside without sunscreen.
Right. Yes. So is this about the end of our...
This is about the end of it.
Okay.
And I've been probably much longer than I should have been.
It's all been very, very interesting.
Oh, one more thing here.
Yes.
When I was growing up, not very long, but when I was growing up, they would sell shoes to parents by having them look in there, x-ray the kids' feet, and see how much toe room and stuff they had.
Really?
You can look in and see
I can see that. Yeah. And so they'd stick their feet inside of this machine, and then you could look through the little screen and see how they fit inside the shoe.
Yeah. I used it a couple of times before they were taken away. I'm that old.
Buster Brown must have been proud.
Yeah.
That's cool.
I heard about that thing. Just imagine how many people got foot cancer.
I only used it a couple of times, so.
Wow. Okay, well, Sam, I really appreciate you taking us through.
I'm
and
happy to
showing
do
us
it.
what all you've got here. This museum is an amazing museum, and just going through it and looking at the displays and stuff is fantastic, but having the background behind a lot of this and some of the personal stories has been even better. Now, the museum, does it have a website?
Yes.
Do you know what it is?
I think it's the initials.org, but I'm not sure.
Okay, we'll end up putting that in with the show notes.
I was going to say if you just Google it, it'll come up.
Right, yeah, the National Museum of Nuclear Science and History. And this museum is fantastic. I like to...
What you see in here are our classrooms. We have classes. We have schools in here for field trips and everything, and science classes a lot. We have homeschooled kids come in, and then on days when schools are closed and parents are working, we have science camps, and then all summer we have science camps.
Oh, cool. Okay. So people could take advantage of that too.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I like to finish my podcasts out by saying that the world is full of wonder. And this nuclear wonder is just unbelievable. I mean, the technology that took into developing it and the way that they've used it and everything is absolutely fascinating. People need to get out and explore. That's the reason I don't want to put this on YouTube, is because I want people to come see what we're doing and get an idea of what's here and then be curious enough to come see. And
there is an amazing amount of history here.
oh, an amazing amount.
And hopefully, within the next 6 months to a year, we will have another building.
Oh, really?
Yeah, we've got a bunch of stuff stored on base.
Oh my God, there's more stuff to see.
More stuff to see.
That will be basically what we call our Museum Artifact Center. And it will be kind of not open to the public, but there will be guided tours of it at certain times for extra.
We'll have to come back. I've been here twice before. I'm going to come back again.
For extra price.
For those things that we didn't get to see today.
Yeah, we've got at least another 50 weapons on base.
Wow. And everybody have an absolutely wonder-filled day.
All the roll and go, where am I to go? Meet Johnny, where am I to go? For I'm a young and a sailor lad, and where am I to go?